for Dumfries and Galloway Council, but in partnership with Natural Scotland and the Home Energy Scotland Advice Centre, which we also have the contract for South West Scotland. So the area-based scheme for 13-14, there was £60 million for programmes across Scotland. The amount which was allocated to Dumfries and Galloway Council, you see, was 1.2 million. Now, really exciting schemes. The aim at the time, when the scheme was introduced, which it was launched in June 13, was that these were all the areas it was going to cover. There was a lot of Scottish Government money going in, and there was a lot of energy company obligation money. So in fact, the Scottish Government money was expected to be... Was I not talking loud enough, or was I? All right, okay. And so the Scottish Government money was thought to be one part, and there would be 2 to 3 parts of energy company obligation money coming through utilities. Now, we won't go into the details of that because I had promised I would only talk for 10 minutes, and I might be here for a lot longer if I got into that. But that was the objectives, and it was to target owner-occupiers and those renting privately. The aim was very much to target those in fuel poverty, to reduce carbon emissions, energy company obligation funding, and to support the local economy, and particularly the local economic development, particularly in terms of local contractors being able to do the work. Just out of interest, do I need to keep pressing this? No, that's it. Okay.
Don't know why it's happening, Liz. Just keep your eye on the red light.
Right.
If it goes out, just press it again.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thanks. So, just to explain, the reason that the area-based schemes was so exciting, and so much of what we needed across Scotland, is that there has been schemes over the past which have targeted loft insulation and cavity wall. Now, those are the cheap energy efficiency measures to do. I'm going to talk about external wall insulation, and just to explain, external wall insulation will look like a rendered property by the time you see the outside of it. So it will look like this, or it's a slightly darker colour that we're actually using. I can certainly pass this round, but the insulation behind it is about twice that depth. But that's when I talk about external wall insulation, it goes on in blocks of the insulation, and then you'll see this netting and layering on top. One of the householders recently described it as dominoes, and that is a bit what it looks like, the way it's attached. So I can send that one round, but I realise you're all sitting quite far apart, so don't worry, but I think it's quite useful to know. Internal wall insulation, I'm also going to talk about. Now, internal wall insulation is also quite expensive to do, but makes a massive difference. So the internal wall insulation, this is the material that would go on your stud partition, and then this is the insulation that will go between it. So an internal wall, where you can't do the external wall insulation, you can't do cavity fill, then this is another solution. So just so you know what it all looks like. Sorry, it's more exercise this end. Thank you. So the areas that were targeted for the project was these 4 particular project areas. And they were all areas where there's real issues about fuel poverty, particularly the rural fuel poverty is a real issue across Scotland. And it's something that the Energy Agency in our 15 years of operation have been desperately trying to target. And it's a brilliant opportunity, the AB schemes. The area-based schemes also had the huge opportunity that it looked like you were going to be doing whole house retrofit, which is amazing, and which they do in other parts of Europe. They do it in Germany and Finland that we've had partnerships with. But to get people to understand that you really want only to target a house once. You don't want the householder to be irritated several times when they're having different work carried out in the house. So the areas that were chosen in Dumfries and Galloway were Shirley Road, Mannering Avenue, predominantly in this area, and you have I have some pictures of the areas that have been done, and the difference is amazing. Then in town centre housing renewal area, Bury Street, Friars Venel and Queen Street, all quite challenging areas to work in for a variety of reasons, but this was still very much the aim for the whole house approach. So to explain, in general, the schemes were targeted at council tax A and B band, or householders which were in serious fuel poverty. And it has been hugely successful for those bands, but it's also encouraged people in the higher council tax bands to do something about their properties, and there are, under the new schemes, there are ways in which they can contribute to that, so they can still get the work done. For years we've had cavity and loft and cavity insulation schemes. A lot of these households have already been targeted. I hope a lot of you have it in your properties, but those are the sensible measures to do first. So I'll go through this very quickly. This is the range of measures that were available under the scheme. Again, it was quite targeted geographically and in terms of what we could do in each property. This is a summary of the results. I've also got a breakdown of each area if anybody wants it, but it's quite important to give you the summary. There will be, the scheme continues to September, so there are still measures going in, but there expects to be 297 measures installed. And as you can see, this makes a huge difference, over £2 million on the fuel bill savings in the lifetime. One of the householders said that he was paying £125 a week on his energy bills. He's now, before the weather was quite this good, he's now paying £25. So actually it should have a massive impact across the area. Very clear, this work would never have taken place without the help of the government and the energy company funding, and huge improvements have been made. One of the things I think it's worth highlighting is the difficulties of doing this sort of work. It is very challenging. You have to have very cooperative householders, particularly when you're doing internal wall insulation. And this gives you some examples of areas where we have done work. You'll see the top pictures are pre the work. The bottom ones are afterwards. And there's also things that can be done at the same time, like aligning the downpipes, improving the gutters, doing the wall insulation in the back of the property. There's a few more. The isolated and properties in small villages are always quite a challenge because they tend to be a lot of character, and it's really important to do work in a sensitive way to those properties. So this is Shirley and Mannering area in Dumfries. And that is, apologies, it's got rural at the top. It doesn't on your printouts, but it makes a huge difference to the area with the re-rendering and the end finish. So that's part way through the property. I have got other information about more specific properties that have been done where you have a very attractive rural stone-built property. You definitely don't want to put external wall insulation on it, and so the internal wall insulation has been done. There's there's several properties where there's been a combination of everything. External wall insulation at the back, internal where you've got attractive red sandstone, and also work in the comb ceilings and work in the loft. So you can imagine it's quite complicated to get the contractors to do that range of work. I think I probably have spoken for 10 minutes. Is there an opportunity for questions? Or yeah. So if anybody has any particular questions.
We wouldn't want to chase you away, Liz, or terminate your presentation earlier, but if you have concluded, then fine. Members, I'm sure, will have some questions for you. Members, any questions for Liz? Ian?
I suppose I'll just pick up right here. I would have probably picked up on the next one as well. I mean, obviously it is a good scheme. We've benefited Dumfries and Galloway really well from it. But in 95 out of 100 people that will come forward and what either be referred or actually use this as a product, that we would use it as a product, or they'll want somebody to come in and do it, so that again at the start of the job somebody comes in, does the whole job, walks away, but you get that 5% where they say, well, I want to do it myself, again, I'm a builder, I'm a joiner, whatever it is, whatever the skills, and say, is there any room for manoeuvre in that? When it's, maybe it applies more to the next the report on the committee, but it's just that you've done it in the past, maybe you've got bad experience with that, but certainly I did make a light inquiry about that once before, because somebody who's a builder in my area, certainly, he says, listen, I could do that myself, and maybe even it might be cost benefits, it might not cost as much, so just, and other than that, I mean, I think it's a fantastic programme.
Exactly what you're saying. We've really pushed that side of it, and also to work with local contractors. Unfortunately, the energy industry has become so heavily regulated that now, in order to claim the energy company obligation money for one measure, so for a cavity wall or external wall insulation, the contractor has to be accredited under PAS 2030, and he has to fill in 54 bits of paperwork to get that funding from the utility company per measure, so which makes it incredibly difficult to have local contractors doing the work. Some of the heating measures have been subcontracted to a local company, and some of the joinery work has, but it tends to be subcontracted from the main contractor who tendered for the work for the whole of the area. So I completely agree with you that we really should be encouraging people either to do it themselves or small local contractors, which is very much our aim, but it's become increasingly difficult, although that is one of the aims of 1415, but the legislation will continue to make it difficult.
Thanks for that, Ian. Alistair?
Well, I think, Chair, it's really no sufficient with regards to the difference to say that it's becoming increasingly difficult, and leave it at that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I mean, we've all heard expressions of concern, and frustration over the years about, the relentless increase in growth and bureaucracy. And perhaps this is a classic case where we should be turning around and saying, no, enough is enough, and without sort of interfering with the implementation of the scheme, let me make that abundantly clear, Chair, but, surely, we should be challenging situations like what we've just heard outlined, with a view, in fact, to having them addressed to allow the type of situation that Ian has proposed and you have agreed should be permissible to take place.
Thanks for that, Alistair. I presume that's something that the Council can explore, not necessarily this particular committee, but I'm sure Claire will take that sentiment to the appropriate member of staff. Can you do that, Claire, please? Yes. Liz, do you want to add anything to what Alistair has said?
Just to say that it has always been our intention as a local organisation to do that. And in fact, it was one of the conditions of the tender. The tender goes out through Public Procurement Scotland. And it was very clear in the tender that as much as possible needed to be done employing local contractors. So that bit we can get in, but in terms of people doing it themselves who are professional builders, unless they're accredited, it is very difficult to then pull in the Scottish Government funding and the energy company money. So, but, yeah.
Thanks, Liz. Anybody else? Okay. Liz, can I thank you very much for your time today, for doing your presentation. Are your contact details contained within these documents? Should anyone want to make contact with you, or is it just simply a mechanism that you get in touch with the Energy Agency?
The contacts are in there. You've also got a calendar, which I couldn't resist putting in. Dumfries and Galloway Council and the Education Department have funded energy lessons for pupils across Dumfries and Galloway for about 8 years. And so the very important bit, not only do people get measures in their property, it's also the calendar provides behavioural advice. And on the back of that, there is the contact details. So the calendar, the calendar is for January 15, but the schools have just produced it, and it's a brilliant calendar. So I think it's in there. Is it? I'm looking to check. Yeah, you have got one, yeah. So that's for you all to use next year.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thanks once again for your time. Thank you. Okay, members, we come to item 4, Home Energy Efficiency Scotland area-based scheme proposals, and John Lynch is going to take us through this report.
Thanks, Chair. Just it's really a kind of follow-on report from the presentation that you've just received from Liz. It's confirming that the allocation that Dumfries and Galloway received for 2014-15 under the HEAPS ABS programme has been increased to just over £2 million, which is a 60% increase on 13-14 figures. The proposal that was before members last year was essentially for a 2-year programme. So what this report's saying is essentially we're carrying on with the projects that were agreed previously, albeit with a significantly increased allocation of funds. The details of the projects are set out to 3.4 through to 3.9. And just touching on some of the complexities that Liz touched on in terms of the practical completion of this work, we've taken the decision to re-tender the work for the new programme for 14-15. But essentially, it's basically there for members' information and really just to reconfirm the programmes that were agreed last year, which form the basis of the 14-15 bid. Happy to take any questions, and obviously Liz will remain for this report to take any questions in relation to the management of the programme itself. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, John. Alistair?
Paragraph 3.4.4 of the report, Chair, the last sentence, DGHP will be asked to include a clause within their contracts to demonstrate that work will benefit the local economy. In the back of what we've just indicated earlier, is that the best we can do? Is that the best that we're allowed to do in the current situation? Because I'll tell you what, Chair, I would wager a pound to a penny that that's not the way it'll be done in France.
I would have to say I agree with you. John or Liz, can you maybe address that, please? Jim, can you share your ticket with Liz, please, or lend her your microphone?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, the Scottish Government are aware of the particular need to use local contractors, and my argument has always been that rural areas it's even more important. And they are aware of that. I think probably in reality it's probably as much as we can do at this point in terms of the funding, because it does for the external wall insulation, the householders get a 25-year guarantee. So that needs to be managed very carefully in terms of the actual install. So the local contractors are working under a larger company and under their past 2030. So that is working, and that's what we would intend any future contract to say, that the intention must be to employ local contractors. But it is a bit of a challenge when they're bidding very much on finance, and there's no doubt that sometimes it is more cost effective to bring people in from another area who are already trained. But it is an endless challenge, yeah, and we do monitor it quite carefully.
Thanks, Liz. I think the point being well made is that it's long overdue that the folk in Dumfries and Galloway got a fair crack of the whip and were given an opportunity to bid and indeed secure contracts. Alistair?
I couldn't agree more with your sentiments, sir, but I mean, going back 40 odd years, Dumfries and Galloway, or certainly the western part of Dumfries and Galloway, it'd be presumptuous of me to say anything other than that, is littered with examples where people were brought in from further up the west of Scotland to carry out housing modernisation, etc. type work, and it was an absolute, and I see Councillor Foster shaking his head in agreement, it was an absolute catastrophe and disaster. The blunt fact of the matter is that in house building terms, this region has had a better record over the last number of decades than an awful lot of the people who've been brought in from outside. And it's a wee bit of an irony, in my view at least, Chair, that some of our people are having to work under the aegis of folks out with this part of the world. To quote Bob Robison, when Larry took over Robison and Davison, it wasn't to fling Robison and Davison a lifeline; it was to bring financial stability to them. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for your observation, Alistair. John?
Thanks, Chair. Just to confirm to members that what we will certainly endeavour to do in discussions with the Energy Agency when the procurement process kicks off, we'll take on board the sentiments expressed today and see if we can stiffen up that commitment around local economy and local contractors. And we'll see what we can do within the prevailing regulations as Liz has described them.
Can we get a report back on that, sir?
Certainly. Aye. Can you ensure that happens, John, please?
Yes, we'll do that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, John. Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. That's exactly what I was going to ask for myself. Was I think because of the potential economic benefit to Dumfries and Galloway, and there is obviously bureaucratic processes in place that are kind of stifle that we should get a report back saying with different options how we can best influence that, whether it's writing to the Scottish Government to say, listen, or ECOs or whatever, can say, listen, you're far too bureaucratic and restrictive. It's having a detrimental effect on the local economy, Dumfries and Galloway, the construction industry in particular, or just to see a report come back that outlines all that, because obviously there is a detriment. We're picking up on that, and it's, at the end of the day, we could actually come in at a much better value. Then it could actually come in, we could see more bang for our buck when it comes to it. So I do think, though, mind that Ken Scottish Government at the end of the day have said, here's 60%, me an extra £600,000. That shows confidence in Dumfries and Galloway and their actual ability to stand up to this programme and deliver it. So I mean, absolutely delighted in regards to that. But I do think the more we can tie this into the local economy, the better. And it'd be good to see a report coming back and just let's pin this right down.
Thanks for that, Ian, and I'm sure John will liaise with our Economic Development Department to ensure that a comprehensive report is indeed brought back to members. Does anybody else have any? Liz?
Sorry, can I just add this, that actually the output for Dumfries and Galloway has been amazing. That actually in terms, when you compare the number of measures and the level of work which has happened in Dumfries and Galloway, it is way above a lot of the other local authorities where they are nearer to contractor bases. So I have to say, although I personally have a strong wish to use local contractors, and we have where possible, and a lot of the heating work has been done by a company already mentioned, actually in terms of the measures which have gone in, the council have done amazingly well in terms of getting the measures into all these properties. Sorry, I just had to add that bit as I had meant to say it earlier.
As long as that's a compliment, Liz will take it. Thank you very much. Any other members? In that case, we've got the recommendations. 2.1, note the HEAPS ABS allocation of £2,047,669 for Dumfries and Galloway, and that this represents a 6% increase on 2013-14 allocation. Agree the continuation of the projects to be delivered in 2014-15 as set out in 3.4 to 3.9. And note the 2014-15 contracts were subject to a new tender process to be managed by the Energy Agency. Note. Thank you, Ian.
Would it be right just to say to agree to a further report outlining what we talked about earlier?
Happy to have Claire add that 2.4, a further report was brought back to a future meeting of this committee. Thanks very much, members. Okay, thanks again, Liz, for your contribution. Item 5, Trust Sheltered Housing. This report's by Jim O'Neill. Jim, would you like to take us through this report, please?
Yep, thanks, Chair. It's probably worth just taking members through the sequence of events that's resulted in the report being in front of members today. The starting point in these discussions were that Trust Housing Association at a national level reached a board decision that they were no longer prepared to operate housing support contracts that generated an operational deficit. And that was a decision that they reached through their own organisation and without discussion with the council. So we were notified that that decision had been made. In terms of how we responded to that, the last report we took to this subcommittee to try and deal with that issue recommended not increasing the contract value in response to that, which would have the effect of Trust Housing Association remodelling their housing support contracts within Dumfries and Galloway. However, that suggestion or that proposed recommendation resulted in pretty much of an outcry from existing sheltered and very sheltered residents, and members that were at the last committee will recall that tenants and their representatives were present at the meeting and prior to the meeting, members were made aware that they had very strong views in relation to the future delivery of their services. As a result of that, members didn't agree the report's recommendations not to increase the contract value and instead remitted to officers and senior politicians to go away and discuss with Trust Housing Association, their tenants and their advocates, a solution to be brought back to this committee. That meeting took place and the report that members have in front of them today reflects the outcome of discussions at that meeting, and the report is recommending that the contract value is increased on an ongoing basis by £47,639 and thereafter an inflationary increase applied on an annual basis, with advice being taken from colleagues in finance about the precise figure. Now, the inflationary increase has been recommended in the report because Trust Board position is that their contract has to be sustainable now and into the future. So if a one-off increase was given and it wasn't uprated by inflation, in the following year the contract would no longer be financially sustainable and we would be falling foul of Trust Board's decision. And that would result in a regular series of reports having to come back to this committee to ask members to make decisions to make further increases to the contract to make it sustainable going forward. At the meeting that we had, that was chaired by the then chair of the Housing Subcommittee, but it wasn't Councillor McClung because he was off ill at the time. Brian Collins stood in and he chaired the meeting that we had with Trust Housing Association and their residents. And I suppose key to the discussions were the views that residents expressed, and they're set out at 3.5 in the report, and they were very clear that any reduction in service would have an adverse impact, in summary, in their overall sense of safety and well-being, and it wasn't considered at the meeting that a reduction in service was a realistic option to bring back to this committee because it was incompatible with residents' views, but not only that, it would be incompatible with the decision of Trust Housing Association's board. So that's a summary of why this report's here today and why it's got the recommendations that it has. And myself, Andrew MacDonald and John, if need be, will be happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thanks for that, Jim. It was indeed a comprehensive summary. Ronnie?
Yeah, just on 3.5, and these bullet points were given me because I've not been party to this before, but these concerns expressed in the meeting were, I mean, this is what Trust Housing was saying that they would have to do if they kept the contract the same. They would need to put these measures into place for the same amount of money, and these services would be cut. So it was Trust Housing that was saying this is what they would do, and there's no other alternatives but that.
The position of Trust Housing Association was that the council can make the decision to increase the value of the contract to meet the costs that they currently require to deliver the current level of service, and if the council decided not to increase the value of their contract, they would remodel their services and it would result in a reduction in the sheltered and very sheltered housing provision in the region, with much of it being turned over to be what's called retirement housing, which doesn't have on-site warden services. So there would be a direct reduction in services if the council didn't agree to increase the contract value.
Thanks for that, Jim. Ryan, do you want to come back?
It just seems like a gun to the head rather than just saying they would save the money elsewhere, but anyway, that's...
Thanks, Ronnie. Alistair and then Jim.
Well, I may say that the leader's sentiments certainly resonate with me because in conjunction with Councillor McClung and Councillors Nicholl and McComb, I was summoned, would be one way of putting it, to a meeting which took place in Newton Stewart and the trust, this organisation's development in Newton Stewart. And it was obvious that, we'd been sat in, I think what you could colloquially say was the penitence stools But at the end of the day, they totally misjudged the mood of the meeting. Because by the time they'd listened to their tenants and their families and their advocates and the four councillors, I think they realised at the end of the day that, where the real sympathies lay. We are where we are, sir. It's something of a vault fast from where we originally started off. That doesn't matter. As far as I'm concerned, we're going to finish up, as I say, providing or ensuring that quality services which meet the needs and aspirations of vulnerable people are provided, and I've no problems with that. My only issue, Chair, in terms of this report is at paragraph 3.6, where I go on to say that there is a risk that other housing support providers may make similar funding requests to the council, and we may be struggling, if I'm reading that correctly, to meet the resource implications of these. Now, my view, Chair, is that we're obliged to provide consistent and even-handed services the length and breadth of Dumfries and Galloway, and if that situation arises, I would be of the opinion that we've got to make every effort to ensure that these people are treated no less fairly and equitably than Trust are. So I've no problems with going down the route that has been suggested today, but that is my only concern. And I realise at this stage, Chair, it might be conjectural. We might not get any such approaches, but I would hope that if we do, we take cognizance of our decision here today, and we endeavour, as I say, to treat other similar approaches equally justly as we're talking about doing today. Thanks for your time, Chair.
Thanks, Alistair. Jim? And then Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As was said earlier, unfortunately, I was unable to make the meeting with Trust Housing. If I had, I would have had some serious questions to ask them. Before the meeting that Councillor Geddes refers to, I was sent financial detail or figures regarding the current funding and the sum that was required for 13-14. I was also sent in the same document, and this was by Trust Housing, the two different options that they had considered. And while I totally agree with Councillor Geddes, it's we have to look after our most vulnerable people. My big disappointment was in the fact the way in which the whole thing was done. It was said at one of the meetings that I was at that Trust Housing themselves had never said that the council had cut the budget. However, the chief executive actually emailed all MSPs for the area and the councillors a copy of a letter that he had sent to the Independent Living and Housing Options Support of the Scottish Government, where he actually does say just exactly that. In some cases, direct cuts. Now, it is unreasonable for Trust Housing to then blame what would be a lower member of staff of making a mistake in saying that the council were actually cutting when it was quite clear that they weren't. But they can't blame the more junior member when the chief executive self actually says it in a letter to MSPs and councillors. To go back to the figures that I was talking about, Thornhill, Langham and Glenluce all have sheltered housing, and they gave me the list of the current housing support fund and the sum that would be the sum total that would be required for 13-14, which is reasonably a bit higher than what we're actually currently funding. However, option one that they had considered, they stated quite clearly that those three developments would have no change. There would be no change under their option one, and then they come back with figures which, considering it was going to be of no change, were actually going to cost less than what they're actually looking for us to provide. How sure are we that the Trust Housing figures are actually accurate if we can have an option that they considered was going to cost less, but there was going to be no change in the service that they were going to provide?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have the figures that you're referring to, but I'm quite sure Jim, John and Angela will have had an opportunity to explore with finance. I think you already said that. Would you just confirm what the situation is for Councillor McClung?
I think the situation, Chair, that Councillor McClung's describing is the option where they moved from sheltered or very sheltered to retirement model in housing,
Unfortunately, Jim, we can't get into debate about this obviously, but I'm happy to have you come back.
Yeah, I will supply the document to Mr O'Neill. It quite clearly says, under the considerations that they were making, option 1 and they give a price, and they also state that there would be no reduction in service.
Can I answer? Sorry, can I answer that one? The services that you're talking in question, what they were talking about doing was they would actually change the housing support element back to housing management, and they would actually reduce the number of hours the warden was doing the housing support element, and that would be the difference.
Again, I'll
I
come
think
back
I'm
and say
being
I will,
reminded by governance, Jim, that we should be dealing with information that's contained in the report.
I will provide the information to the officers. That's not what it says.
That's good, Jim. That's absolutely fine. And in terms of what the Chief Executive might or might not have said to offend members of staff, that's an internal matter, I would suggest. Although, clearly, all members at one committee I attended were extremely disappointed that that suggestion was made that the council would actually cut services or cut money to affect services. Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. Just when I looked through this, I couldn't see where the money was coming from. I know we're saying an uplift, but I couldn't actually see in the report where the money was actually coming from. Maybe it's because the decisions were made previously coming from the same revenue source as previously agreed. But secondly, I do think very much that we shouldn't agree it kind of in perpetuity, so to speak. This should be kind of obviously through the service reviews and the budget process. We need to look at this through that mechanism. We shouldn't be able to agree at committee here, say this is it, and on we go and just keep going. Because I would like to look into the finer detail. Councillor McClung's obviously referred to a lot of detail I haven't seen. And there'll be questions probably out with the committee through the budget process, as all members have a right to ask for detailed information. I'd like to drill into some of that just to see exactly what is being supplied. Does it affect my ward directly? But obviously there's a strategic role to be looking at here.
Thanks for that. We'll come to what views may or may not be when the debate has been concluded. Jim, can you confirm where the funding for this additional 47,000 will come from, please?
Yep, thanks, Chair. We're going to manage the increase from within existing strategic housing services budgets. And I think the point that Councillor Geddes made in terms of future requests, I think what the report's trying to describe is that we wouldn't be able to meet those from existing strategic housing services budgets, but that doesn't mean to say that that means the answer is no. And in the circumstances described by Councillor Geddes, it would be appropriate if further requests are made to bring those back to committee for consideration. I think the report's saying if they were made and we had to meet the costs within our budget, that would not be possible. We don't have the money.
Okay, I've got Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Geddes.
It's very vague what you're saying there, Jim, about the costs and the impact of what we're actually doing here today for other services. What you're saying is could come back and they could request, we wouldn't have the money, but then it would have an impact if we're treating everybody on a fair and equal basis. That money would need to come from somewhere. So what kind of figures are we talking about here? I think the review, Ian was talking about the reviews, and I think that's maybe a way forward on that. I don't know what services we are being provided for this money. I don't know what's in the contract, or what, I don't know what the differences are. Is there any differences, or is it just extra money and we're just going to put that as inflation all the time, or is there any detail like that?
Thanks, Chair. The services that are delivered in each location are outlined at 3.3 in the report, and in terms of future reviews, at 3.6 in the report, it says that further discussions will take place in the coming months regarding the future location of sheltered housing support side contracts in line with the wider strategic review of older people's services. So in the past, what we've done is taken reports to committee outlining our approach to service review and the recommissioning of services. And that's been done on a prioritised basis over the whole housing support budgets. And member may recall that a recent housing subcommittee, we agreed to put out to tender homeless outreach contracts, and we're currently in the process of doing that. So we're working through the housing support contracts sequentially, but the key thing about the sheltered housing contracts is that health and social work also have an interest in the delivery of these services, and discussion will need to take place with colleagues in these services and consideration will need to be given about how these services fit into the NHS and adult services integration agenda. So it's not a particularly straightforward strategic answer, because there's so many questions that remain to be answered at the moment about the future delivery of services. So we've been also remitted by previous decisions of the Housing Subcommittee to initiate discussions with social work about the future location of these services, because any decisions made about the delivery of these services has an impact on social work budgets and NHS budgets, and we need to view these things in the round going forward. So it's not a very straightforward answer, but that's the answer.
Ronnie?
No, you're right, Jim. It's not a very straightforward answer, but I did read 3.3, but I couldn't understand it, and that's maybe just me. You know, it's 3.3 services provided and that, but it says, for example, tenants of very sheltered accommodation can also benefit from prepared meals and cleaning services. Do they? What is the contract for that? What are they actually contracted to do? The money that we pay them, you know, what's within that? You know, is it for everybody to get a hot meal? Is it for everybody to do this? Is it for to do that? Nothing in here tells me that. And this extra money, what is it you're actually getting for that, on top of that?
For the services that we provide, it's purely housing support, so it's the warden and the care call. If someone's receiving an extra sheltered service, they receive an extra visit from the warden and some extra services that do. If the tenants are receiving an extra sheltered service, then they can also, by themselves, contact Trust and buy in an extra package, which is around the cleaning and the meals. So that's an agreement between the tenant and Trust themselves. It's nothing to do with housing support.
Chair, could I add as well that the uplift and the inflationary increase are not to provide additional services, they're to continue the services as they are, because Trust have not had an inflationary uplift since 2003, meaning that over time the value of their contract has eroded down the way. So this is about keeping existing services, not enhancing them.
I think Ronnie recognised that. I think what he was trying to say was he didn't understand what the service was in the first place, because that report's not specific enough. It just outlines what we're getting, and that remains the same, and the figure varies. Ronnie, do you want to come back in?
You've summed it up. I still don't know exactly what we're getting for that, but anyway.
Alistair, and then Graham.
Well, I appreciate that it's not a straightforward answer that Jim gave us, but I think at the end of the day that, you know, it's helpful as far as I'm concerned on a personal basis, nevertheless. And as I said earlier, Chair, I think it's important that we keep this facility going. My only concern would be that, you know, I would hope fervently that we would get no further applications during the course of this financial year from other similar providers looking for an uprating in their contracts. But if we do, if I understand the thrust of Jim's comments correctly, while there won't be any money in the strategic housing budget, if there's a political with a small p will, I'm sure between the impact and social work, NHS, etc., we'll be able to find any such funding requirements if push comes to shove, albeit we would hope that we'll not be faced with that particular issue to determine.
Thanks, Alistair. And on that basis, are members satisfied that they have enough information before them today to actually make a decision, or would they require further information to be provided before we agree? We could delegate to officers subject to, but anyway, that's something that members need to consider before we actually make any decision whatsoever. I've now got Graham, Jeff, and then Ian, speakers.
In answer to your comments, Chair, I have more than enough information to make a decision. I've been heavily involved in it. It's no doubt many other councillors around the table have. In simple terms, Trust House decided to play a game of brinkmanship. They weren't making money. They had a moral ground to complain. I don't agree the way they went about it, but they played a game of brinkmanship. They caused a lot of upset, but what is unforgivable is they caused a lot of upset to their residents and tenants. And, you know, they were severely worried. If we agree this today, and I will happily move it, the people in Dalrymple Court and Stranraer will sleep soundly tonight. And we, as a housing subcommittee, that's our first and foremost consideration. So I would move the recommendations.
Alistair, okay. So as set out in the report, Graham, you're moving that and Alistair's seconding it, okay. Jeff?
Yeah, one thing that concerns me is if, just reading this report, it looks as if we're going to give them a contract in perpetuity. There's no start date, no end date to it, etc. So if things do change, they say, well, we've got a contract, you agreed this, and, there's no break point in this. And I can see from their point of view, and I agree with Graham, I do think they were playing brinkmanship about this, and unfortunately the tenants got locked into the game, and they're the ones who suffered most. But if they if they're insisting on inflation-proofing this, then I expect at the very least that their staff get inflation rises every year as part of this contract. They're just not pocketing the money in additional profits.
Jim, can you maybe address one thing? How does the future examination of this sit with, for example, the social work exploring the private sector providing home care? Because there's a report coming, I think, next month outlining to members how we might deal with the funding or that element of care for the elderly, which is much the same as this, albeit a private provider, but in a different fashion.
Thanks, Chair. I can attempt to answer, but it would be pretty much in a speculative going forward type of way rather than the position already being known. So what we have is the integration of health and social care. Okay, that's on the agenda and the Council are embarking on that. The focus initially is on older people's services. The Scottish Government are producing regulations and guidance that relates to the future delivery of housing support services. And in their view, these types of services form part of that continuum of care and should be remitted to the integration agenda. We haven't had those discussions yet, so I'm saying that would be the potential forward agenda, but those discussions have yet to take place. So housing support services are part of a spectrum from living independently to achieving high-level care packages, but these are receiving high-level care packages, and these services are central to preventing people moving from low-level support to high-cost residential care packages or high-cost home care packages. And the future discussion is about where these services sit organisationally and where they fit in strategic planning terms alongside the adult care and NHS agenda in relation to older people. And the Council and NHS have just agreed the structures, so the policy discussions have yet to take place. But to pick up on Councillor Lever's point as well, the contracts are not forever. The contracts that we currently have all have a 3 months notice to terminate within them, so that if the unthinkable happens, the Council is in a position to be able to terminate contracts. However, there's an additional clause in the contract that they can be terminated subject to service review. So if the Council looked at the sheltered housing sector and reached decisions about how they wanted services to be delivered in future, the Council is then free to terminate those contracts and either renegotiate them with the providers to deliver a different model of service or put them out to competitive tender if a negotiated position wasn't possible. So we're not in fact locked into them in the long term. This is a solution to take us to the point where we have a strategic review.
Thanks for that, Jim. I've got Ian Carruthers, then Ronnie, and then Alistair again.
Thanks for that, Chairman. Back to the point I made earlier, and Jeff's picked up on it as well. And I think I would rather see at the end of recommendation 2.1 on a recurring basis taken out. I'd feel more comfortable with that, even though there is by default within the contract that we could terminate that anyways. But I do think it has to be picked up under the service reviews and the budget process, but to look at it properly. Because when you look at this, the glaring thing, you could think it's 47.69, that could have potentially been a saving. Because where's that magic from? It's no magic for anywhere that it was there, and it's obviously put a pressure somewhere else. I don't know what to drill into that. That's an operational issue. But clearly, it's if we take that out, I'm comfortable with what's been moved. If we can take that out, but to agree on a recurring basis, even though them clawbacks are there, I don't think we should. I think we should just take it on a recurring basis out of that first recommendation.
Thanks for that. I think there's two things in the report. The 2.1 talks about uplifting it to a figure whereby the services will be maintained at the moment, and then the uplift is on a regular basis. Jim, do you want to come back on that?
Thanks, Chair. Just to pick up on Councillor Carruthers' point, it may be appropriate to make the suggestion that it's uplifted pending future strategic review of sheltered housing and very sheltered housing contracts, so that it's not without limit of time. And we also have that as an action agreed already through the Housing Subcommittee. So that's compatible with previous committee decisions, and it makes it clear that it's not a forever position.
I see, Claire, to note that we've already got a proposal and a second. We'll need to discuss whether or not that might be added, but can we just come to that at the end when we finish the debate, because there might be other proposals or add-ons or take-offs. So if Claire's got a note yet, we'll finish the debate and then we'll come back to the proposal that you and Alistair have made, Graham. Ronnie and then Alistair.
No, that's fine. That gives a degree of comfort to the council, that as well. I think the whole thing, as far as I can see, as I said, I probably don't know the details, but the Trust Housing have done a disservice to their clients the way this has been handled, and I think it's, I think it was stated earlier on that it's the people you look after that need that kind of certainty, and this has done a disservice to them by the way this has been put out, blackmail, in my view. That it's caused this uncertainty.
Notwithstanding what decision we might make today, would it help members if John or Jim or Andrea circulated members a report on what the Trust Housing organisation does locally, maybe a more comprehensive outline than what we have here at present, even if it's just the new members and substitutes that will maybe catch up with what we've actually been dealing with for a long time. Members be happy enough with that? Okay, Alistair and then Ian.
I wonder if it's, sorry for butting in there, but just on that particular point you just raised, I mean, if we go to pick up on Trust themselves, we're talking about the bigger picture here, so would it not be better than under the service reviews? Because there is more than just Trust. Alice has already alluded to potential knock-on effect, so if we're looking at one, surely we can get a broader picture of that.
Provided it's not a document we can't carry home at night, I think that would be all right. I'm sure John or Jim will be able to give an overview on what services we're receiving currently, and with particular detail on the Trust Housing one. John?
Thanks, Chair. I think just to clarify, what you were expecting is just a kind of factual summary of which RSLs operate and which RSLs receive housing support funding. So it's basically just a fact sheet, not a kind of individual service review about Trust. But that's not the proposal, and that obviously would not be compatible with the process that Jim explained here in terms of the integration agenda and the work that we need to do with social work and health. We're quite happy to pull together a simple fact sheet of Trust as an organisation, so you've got a better understanding of how they operate, why they operate. They're a registered social landlord. There's certain obligations that they need to comply with. We can certainly pull that together for you.
I think that'd be helpful, John. Thanks very much for that. I've got Alistair and then Jim.
Just going back to the point, on 2.1, Chair, I would want to keep in the phraseology on a recurring basis, but, put in, for instance, the words, it being appreciated that, and then just put in the explanation that Jim gave us. And if that's acceptable to Graham, that would please me. And 2.2, sir, I think we should make it clear that perhaps, rather than that implies a remit with powers, maybe we should make it a remit to report. And that way keep an extra modicum of control over it as well, if that's acceptable to the mover.
2.2 sounds good. 2.1 I'll leave Claire and Jim to unravel and read it out to you eventually and see if we can come to a consensus. Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's regarding the report that Mr Lynch says that he's going to give us on what Trust is, and etc., etc. Given my qualms, I would also like to know what they are supposed to be providing for the housing support that they actually get for each individual premises.
That's fine. I think that's fine. That's fine, John. Yep. Fine, Jim. Okay. If there are no other members, currently we have a proposer and a seconder to 2.1. Claire, if you and Jim could maybe try and encompass what Councillor Foster and Geddes were wanting to add to what's already proposed, and I'll see if there are any alternative proposals.
Okay, 2.1, I've got basically to keep as is. Is there?
Jim had a bit to add to it, Claire, that Graham and Alice are happy to accede to. Can you just maybe add that bit, Jim, please?
Would suggest rather than, well, I think on a recurring basis, pending the outcome of the strategic review of sheltered and very sheltered housing support services.
Can you embrace that in 2.1, Claire?
Yeah, sorry, my notes, I had that coming in 2.2, so 2.1.
2.1.
Okay, go for
Right,
it again, Claire.
okay. The RIC, as is, was added on at the end, pending the outcome of the strategic older people services review on sheltered housing.
That's in 2.1. Well, no, you two have agreed, yes, aye, okay. And there was a word change in 2.2. I think that was to bring it back to committee for a decision annually rather than delegate to officers, so that members have some control over the annual uplift. Is that right, Alistair? Graham? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll agree to it because I want home. But if we've got a 3-month cancellation and it's as easy to get out of the contract as what Jim outlined, I don't really see the need for it, but I will agree to it and it comes back to the committee monthly.
Very generous of you, Graham. Okay. So we have a proposal. Claire, can you read it out again, please? And then I'll ask if there are any alternative proposals.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. We have a motion proposed by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Geddes, with the recommendation in the report with added 2.1, increase the value of trust housing support contracts from 199,635 to 247,274 on a recurring basis, pending the outcome of the service reviews on older people services, including sheltered housing.
Been very precise here, Claire. The strategic review of sheltered housing and very sheltered housing support contracts.
Right, got it. Sorry, I can't write quick.
Would the mover and seconder be happy if Claire, although we understand it now, if Claire got the exact wording fixed with Jim?
Yeah.
So Claire and Jim will liaise. Jim's already announced. For the third time, Jim, please. What is it, the additional wording?
Pending the outcome of the strategic review of sheltered and very sheltered housing support contracts.
Thank you, Jim. Ian?
I totally agree with that. I think it's a great idea. And what it will help is with future reports with a similar type of contract, we'll look at that 11-year gap. We'll see them. We'll actually see them and see is there an uplift. Because Colin Smith in particular picked up on it last year through the strategic reviews. And he was absolutely right. Why has it been 10 years, 11 years since he actually picked up on this? Because they were too big in the first place. We should monitor things like that far more closely.
And I think Jim's well on the ball with that one. Okay, do we have any alternative proposal to that? In that case, it's unanimously agreed. Claire, can you confirm the member's decision, please?
Thank you very much. I can confirm that the members have agreed the recommendations in the report with the amendments as previously stated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much, members, for your attendance. I have no further business. Thank you.